A chilling scream pierces the peace of the night when a man stabs himself. He cries and wails, yet he stabs himself unwillingly. His little daughter, Tantri, tries to stop him, but to no avail. He stabs himself in the shoulder before turning to his daughter and reciting a prayer for her protection, when an evil being appears behind the man. Enraged, the being forces the man to burn himself alive as Tantri watches in horror. Years later, Tantri wakes up from a bad dream, gasping on a bus to her college dormitory. Once there, she feels a presence that whispers, "Help me," in her ears. At the dormitory, she befriends Faye and Asta, also students. Faye is more friendly and asks Tantri to be careful after learning she's staying alone in the room. While looking around, Tantri finds a picture that slips from her hand and falls under the bed. When she bends to pick it up, she sees a ghastly pale face of a woman staring at her from the other side. Tantri screams but finds there's no one in the room. Sitting in her own room, Asta is looking at text messages from her uncle when a noise grabs her attention. She turns to see her reflection in the mirror slitting her throat. At the cafeteria, Tantri sits with Faye and Asta and asks about the strange things around the school she's been seeing. They tell her 2 of their friends went missing last year, Arum, who suddenly disappeared, and Luki, who is suspected to have taken his own life, but his body was never found. Tantri, Faye, and Asta are soon joined by another student whom Faye introduces as Reza. Tantri has more strange experiences, and the feeling of being watched never leaves her. One night, Faye is listening to the radio in her room when she hears a whisper. Suddenly, her room door opens on its own. She walks out to see who might have opened her door when the door suddenly slams shut, locking her outside. She struggles and finally opens the door. She locks her room and walks to the window where she sees her reflection bleeding from her eyes. This disturbs Faye and she huddles in the corner. That night, Tantri sees Luki in her dream, the boy Asta told her about. He writes a note apologizing for stabbing his ear with a sharp object under the influence of an entity whispering in his ear. Luki rushes outside and slits his throat before falling into the well outside the dormitory. Tantri wakes up from the nightmare and wipes the sweat off her face, but oddly enough, she gets blood all over her face, terrifying her. The next day, she goes to the well and sees Luki's decomposing body inside. She tells the college staff and the word spreads. As the students gather to see if it's true, Tantri finds another student, Mahi, taking photographs. Faye, visibly shaken, meets Asta and shares her troubling vision. As they discuss the vividness of the vision, they see Tantri and call her over to ask about her discovery of Luki's body. Tantri reveals that she found it after dreaming about it. The group decides that if she can find Luki, then she can also find Arun. So they head to Arun's abandoned house with Riza driving. Inside the house, Tantri, while exploring alone, goes into a trance and uncovers a hidden satanic ritual sign. She's compelled to recite a spell from a mysterious book that appears, calling for the blood of 5 sinners. Asta interrupts her trance and the group is shocked to find their names on the ritual sign with the exception of Tantri's, realizing Arun had put a curse on them. Despite Tantri's reluctance, Asta insists she's key to resolving the situation due to her unique connection to these events, and she's the only one that can stop the curse. So they decide to complete the ritual together. Tantri distributes glass shards, and as they hold hands, their blood seals the ritual. Tantri recites the spell while others repeat after her. Suddenly, they hear a voice that states that Tantri doesn't deserve to call her. The voice states that they have now been cursed and will serve as slaves to the devil. The entity named Suryugana then materializes and states that she has cursed 5 sinners and for generations to come she'll haunt their wives, daughters, and offspring till their deaths. However, she asks if Tantri is willing to submit herself to her and she'll release the curse. Tantri begs her to stop and questions how many more lives she would claim. Scared, Asta asks Reza to drive her home. She enters to find her uncle who's on oxygen sleeping. She carefully tries to collect some hair from his beard, but he suddenly wakes up and sees her hiding scissors in her hand. He forces her to drop them, and as payback he uses her to satiate his animalistic desires. It's revealed he's been a douchebag for quite some time now. That night, Tantri is on her way to take a shower when she goes into another trance and she sees Asta's uncle getting strangled by his oxygen wire wrapped around his neck. The uncle soon dies and Tantri finds herself back in her room. She's shocked to see the same oxygen wire in her hand and goes to Asta's room, demanding she return the book. Tantri also sees Faye in the room and notices they've drawn the same symbol on the floor. She tells them she knows what they did, but Faye refuses to give it back and tells Tantri that Asta was being exploited by her uncle and had become pregnant once but was made to have an abortion. Asta slaps Faye for revealing things she didn't want anybody else to know. Enraged, she asks Tantri to leave, but Tantri, though she feels bad for what happened to Asta, refuses to let them make any more mistakes. She warns she won't help them anymore, but Asta remains indifferent, so Tantri leaves. Over the next few days, Tantri distances herself from the group and sits alone during lunchtime. Mahiz seizes the opportunity and talks to her. He tells her that a room was harassed by Luki and Reza. The two had placed a bet on who could sleep with a room first. Reza slept with the room and circulated her intimate pictures throughout the college, with Asta and Faye being compliant. In the cafeteria, Asta starts choking on something and pulls out a piece of glass from her throat. Unhinged, she gets up to leave, but gets enraged when she sees Mahiz talking to Tantri. Seeking revenge, she goes to Tantri's room, steals some of her belongings, and returns to her room, which she tries to put a curse on Tantri. Faye, who had been knocking on the door, suddenly hears the door opening. Asta walks out, possessed. She attacks Faye and rips a lock of her hair from her head before closing the door. This terrifies Faye, and she runs out of her dormitory. Suragana follows Faye, and without her realizing it, she goes into a trance and gouges her eyes out for Suragana. Tantri and Mahi return to the dormitory, talking about a book that her room carried before strange things started happening. Since Asta was looking for it, she ransacked her room's house, hoping to find the book, but when she did, Asta refused to return it. Suddenly, Tantri goes into a trance and finds herself near an old house in the woods. She hears a woman screaming, and upon peeking through a window, she sees a woman named Suragana being ravished by 5 men. Tantri then sees Suragana writing a spell in a book before she uses her blood to complete the ritual and levitates. She puts a curse on those 5 men till they die. With that, she sets herself on fire. Tantri suddenly wakes up. She tells Mahiz that she saw Suragana being ravished, after which she wrote the names of those 5 men in the spell book, and one of the names was her grandpa. Mahiz suggests that a room might be asking for Tantri's help, and he offers to help Tantri find a room. Meanwhile, Asta is in full revenge mode and summons Suragana. Mahiz and Tantri visit Arum's house. Mahiz goes ahead to make sure it's safe, while Tantri senses Suragana's presence. Suragana, however, can't seem to touch Tantri because something is protecting her. She tells Mahiz about the presence when suddenly all the windows break. Mahiz protects Tantri, using himself as a human shield, and collapses as shards pierce his flesh. This enrages Asta even more. Just then, Tantri sees Arum's apparition pointing in a direction, and Tantri follows her and arrives in a room where she sees Arum chained. She goes into a trance and sees how Arum started hurting herself after being humiliated, which forced her father to chain her for her own safety. However, he too fell prey to Suragana's curse and lost his life. Once back to the present, Tantri asks Arum if she's alive. When she sees her moving, Tantri tries to remove her chains, but hearing Asta's voice, she stops and turns to see a possessed Asta holding a knife at now conscious Mahi's throat. Despite Tantri pleading with Asta to stop, she stabs Mahi's and then proceeds to slit her own throat. Arum, now possessed by Suragana, breaks her chains in an instant. She starts repeating the spell when Tantri grabs the knife Asta had and stabs Arum, apologizing to her. Arum returns to her consciousness and thanks Tantri for ending her misery before she collapses. Days later, Reza was arrested for ravishing women after 5 female students opened up about the incident. Tantri remained protected because of the prayer her father taught her, which she often said with all her conviction. Once back in the dormitory, Tantri throws the spellbook into the fireplace. In the end, Faye went blind and was institutionalized, where she would scream and bleed from her eyes. And Reza also went insane and ended his life by slamming his head against his cell bars repeatedly. Tantri suddenly wakes up from a trance on a bus and is shocked to find the spellbook in her hands. She turns to see the passengers are all dead people. In the meantime, we see a woman sitting in Arum's room. She turns to reveal blood-red eyes, making us wonder if it's the beginning of the vicious cycle again. That concludes our horror movie recap of Mantra Suragana. Don't forget to subscribe for a free guide on what not to do when dealing with demonic entities, and make sure to share this with your friends so they can stay informed too.